parts of the Bible that you chose extremely. They pertain to us as no other parts of the Bible perhaps could have. He said, there is a time for everything. And Russ always said that there is a time for everything. Always. Today is a time to celebrate. Today is a time to celebrate Russ for the person he was, and for, in my case, at least, for the scientist he was. I do want to point it out. The second thing you said was about nature teachers, and that was absolutely, completely true of us. So I never accompanied him on a long walk or anything like that, but we used to look quite intently at natural forms. And in fact, he introduced me to a book by R.C.D. Wentworth Thompson, and that was on nature in science. Okay. And after that, for me, the world was never the same. Whenever I would look at a flower, whenever I would look at a leaf, I would think of Russ. And in fact, not many of you know that despite the fact that he was a material scientist, in the year 1988, he spent one summer trying to grow cauliflowers. Because somehow cauliflowers symbolize fractals. Now you may not have never heard of fractals, and I'll tell you later about them. And the third that you chose was about clothing and feeding the ones who need. And that is something that struck all these years. The first time I went to Russ, I came to Russ's home. Tell you more about that. I found that there were always students at his home. There were always somebody who was passing through maybe perhaps a difficult circumstances, and he was at his home. And such kindness towards people who are not your family, who are not your dear friends, that was strange. That was actually very strange. I've come to say in recent years that it is America that has taught me the value of kindness, what kindness means. It is America that has taught me charity. I'm not from the United States. Okay. But I think Russ played an enormous role in my learning what charity is. And what was amazing about Russ was that he never would make you feel as if you were under any obligation to him. That was amazing about Russ. So the three choices that you made were immaculate. Now I came to know Russ in March 1984. I was at that time a postdoc at Penn State. He walked into the room of my supervisor. And a few minutes later, my supervisor called me and said, meet Russ Messier. Okay, and we chatted for a while, and he told me something about fractals, and I had no idea what fractals were. But that didn't prevent him from coming over to my office for the next 2 or 3 months, every 2 weeks or so, and we would chat, and he would try to explain. Now, one thing I have to tell you about Russ, one other flaw, if you will. This is Moody point here. Russ did not know mathematics. He could add and subtract. He could multiply, but no mathematics beyond that. And fractals were intensely mathematical. Now, Russ found a different way of treating mathematics in the case of fractals. He had things called scanning electron microscope images. And he talked about things like mass, radius, dimension, and analyzed these images at a nanoscale of many materials. But he himself could not do that. Okay. And he said, we have to somehow find a way. Well, we continued that way, that we started discussions, and there was a conference held at think it was in June of 1985. No, it was July 1985, because as it turns out, our daughter, my wife is there, was just about 3 days old. So I know from her birthday, it was in late July 1985. And we had spent time at the conference. And then one day, Russ came and said, "Hey, have you heard of Dr. Seuss?" Well, he said, "You know, you have a daughter now, and you have to kind of read his books to her." So he brought with him a copy of Dr. Seuss's book, The Cat in the Hat Comes Back. Well, I was reading that book, and it suddenly struck me that Dr. Seuss knew everything about fractals. And the next day when we met, maybe 2-3 days later, I said, "You know, that book contains fractals." And he said, "Explain to me." Now, I know that many of you may not remember, but there is a cat A and a cat B and a cat C, etc. And they become smaller and smaller in sizes. And this is all an explanation of mass radius dimension measured on a logarithmic scale. And in fact, a few years later, somebody asked me, there was a journal called Journal of Recreation Mathematics, if I would write an article for it. And I said, "Yes, I would." And I said, "Dr. Seuss and Russ Messier taught me fractals." So anyway, a few months after the conference, Russ said, "You know, we are having kind of a barbecue, etc. outside our home. And go on over." My wife could not go because she was recovering from surgery. And I had a daughter who was about, I guess, 4 months old or so, somewhere around that. And she said, "You go with her." So I took her. And, well, it was kind of difficult to take care of a 4-month-old child at that point. But that's how I met Linda. And Linda took over the Pioneer's care for the next couple of hours. And I was able to meet all the friends and lab mates of Russ. And also at that time I met Steve and Heidi. I'm sorry, Steve and Candy. Sorry. Okay. And eventually we became great friends. We were co-researchers. We did a lot of things together in research. And we also were friends. So much so that one time when Natalia, our daughter, was in the 8th grade, and when Linda was her teacher, and she had been told not to call Aunt Linda in school, but that escaped somehow. And other kids asked her, "How come she's your Aunt Linda?" And Aunt Linda said, "That's because her father and my husband are brothers." So Russ was my brother, the elder brother I never had. I want to point out a few things about Russ's scientific career. He was a great scientist. He was a great scientist because he never desired for any specific outcome. That is how science has to be pursued. You never desire for an outcome. You find what the outcome is. And that is exactly what Russ did. So he was also not only my elder brother, but he was also my mentor. And I hold fast what he taught me then. Among his, in those days, apart from fractals, his great love of his life in science was nanoscale morphology, the structure of matter at the level of a few nanometers. For those of you who may not know what a nanometer is, let me explain it in this way. If you take an inch and you divide it into 1,000,000 pieces, and then you divide into 3 more pieces. Each piece into 3 more pieces, you will get a nanometer, approximately. And this is the scale at which Russ worked. And he knew all about electron microscopes. And he knew all about how to analyze these images. And when I would look at those images, at that time, I didn't see anything. But he would be able to see everything in them. Eventually, I learned to. Okay. But he would be able to do that. And I was reminded of the fact some weeks ago, I was talking to Russ, in fact, about this, that when I first saw a sonogram as a graduate student, I did not make I had no understanding of what the image was about. And today, if you look at a sonogram, you can make out a fetus very easily. Right? So things have advanced to the point that even I can understand scanning electron microscope images. The other major accomplishment of Russ in science was a way to make ultra-hard materials that were not diamonds. And earlier today, I happened to read an article about climate change that is being accelerated by methane coming out from pulps of cows. And if Russ were there, he would have said, that's not a problem. We will convert that methane into diamonds.
Except for his wife.
Linda kept on asking him, when are you going to coat my earrings with diamonds? That he didn't do. That he didn't do. But he became extremely famous. And I vividly recall the day when I came about 8:30 or so into the department office, and there was a page of New York Times with Russ's photo on it, on the front page. A scientist, I mean, you know, pages of New York Times have all kinds of things, like people doing very, very bad things to others, right? Also, people who are very, very important in politics, and when they meet and shake hands and their pictures are there. But to see a picture of a scientist, my own, very own colleague, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. And for the next 5 or 6 years, I kept on reading about Russ in various kinds of reports. There were scientific reports, there were industrial reports, and whenever they would talk about ultra-hard materials, diamond-like materials, there was Russ Messier. His name was there. He founded a journal, incidentally, and I spoke to the editor-in-chief, the current editor-in-chief of that journal a few days ago. And the journal is in great health. And that's entirely due to what Russ founded it as. There was something about Russ in all of this research that he did that I want to point out, and that is that he was absolutely honest. Now, honesty is the lifeblood of science. We rely on each other to tell the truth. And, you know, that is how we make advancements. But every so often, we are also humans, and we are tempted to cut corners and perhaps do less. Okay. With Russ, that was never the case. Absolute honesty at all times. And there was something else about Russ, also in the scientific matter. And that is, he always put people before everything else. Everything else. I saw that many times. Too many to count. But mostly, I should say, I saw after he became involved in my departmental activities as the undergraduate advisor. He would always, outside his office, have a couple of students waiting to see him, which of course meant that there was at least one inside his office. Inside his office. And for a while, he was so enamored, if you will, of helping students that Linda, I know this would happen. Linda would call at 6 o'clock. You're coming home? Most of the time, yeah, I'm coming home in 15 minutes. But you know what? So 15 minutes would become half an hour. Okay. And then another half an hour would pass by. And the reason was very simple. Russ was actually teaching or trying to teach a Puerto Rican student who could not understand English very well how to solve a problem in dynamics. Those students needed more effort, and Russ was always there to put in that effort. So you are absolutely right. I heard you say he was a great teacher. Yes, I saw him as a great teacher there. And he valued the fact that he had been given by the Alumni Society at Penn State the Outstanding Advisor Award. He valued that greatly. Another award he was given at Penn State was, and that's the highest award for mentoring that is given at Penn State, and he had it. He was given that. He was certainly a teacher, a mentor, a scientist, but above all, an extremely honest and an extremely loving person. And that is how we should remember him. Thank you for listening to me.